The concept of time has been explored by philosophers for centuries with different views about its nature. Ancient Greek philosophers like Parmenides and Heraclitus offered two contrasting ideas. Parmenides believed time is static, meaning that things do not change, they exist eternally and are unaffected by time. This view aligns with the idea of Platonic forms, unchanging and eternal truths. On the other hand, Heraclitus saw time as dynamic, always in motion. He famously said, "You cannot step into the same river twice," showing that the world is in constant flux and time flows like a river. These two views, static and dynamic, represent different ways of understanding time. In modern cultural and critical theory, Danny Cavallaro identifies three key issues when thinking about time. First, how we view time shapes how we see the world. For instance, seeing time as static gives a different perspective than seeing it as dynamic. Second, the relationship between time and space is important, not just in physics but also in cultural studies. Third, time affects how we interpret history. How we understand the past, present, and future impacts our perception of historical events. Traditionally, time has often been seen as teleological, meaning it has a purpose or end goal. For example, in many religious or philosophical traditions, events are thought to unfold toward a destined endpoint. Another common idea is the linear view of time, where events progress in a straight line, like in Darwin's theory of evolution. This theory sees life evolving over time, moving from simple to complex forms. These traditional views, linear, teleological, and evolutionary, see time as predictable and progressing in one direction. However, cultural studies challenge these traditional ideas. For example, T.S. Eliot's poem Four Quartets suggests that time is more interconnected. He writes, "Time present and time past are both present in time future." This means the past, present, and future are not separate but influence each other. Eliot's view disrupts the linear concept of time and offers a richer, more layered understanding. Historian Carr also questions traditional views of time and history. In his work What is History?, Carr argues that history is not just a collection of facts but is shaped by the historian's perspective. A historical document does not give a complete or objective account of the past. It reflects what the author believed happened or what the historian interprets from it. This means both time and history are subjective, influenced by how we perceive them today. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant added more complexity to the idea of time. Kant suggested that time is not something that exists outside us but a framework our minds use to understand the world. In the 20th century, Albert Einstein's theory of relativity showed that time is relative depending on factors like speed and gravity. These ideas reveal that time is far more complex than the simple linear concept we might assume. It is influenced by our perception, culture, and even scientific discoveries. Time and history are deeply connected, but not in the straightforward way we often think. Traditionally, history is seen as a timeline of events happening in order. History is not just shaped by time, it is shaped by how we understand time itself. Our ideas about time influence how we write and interpret history. History is not just a sequence of events, it is a story shaped by changing views on time and how society thinks about its flow and meaning. In cultural theory, time is more than a backdrop for history. It is something people, groups, and institutions use to serve specific purposes. For example, the way we talk about time can shape our identities and how we view our past, present, and future. This means time is not neutral, it is a political tool. The way we use and think about time can influence how we see ourselves and the world. Cultural studies also view time as something created through language and discourse. Time is not an unchanging reality, it is a concept we build using words and ideas. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant suggested that time is not an objective thing but a framework created in our minds. Similarly, post structuralism argues that time is shaped by the way we talk about it, emphasizing that constructed rather than naturally occurring. Susan Sulaiman adds another layer to this discussion through her analysis of time in postmodernism. She explains that postmodernism is highly self aware. It constantly examines how the present connects to the past and the future. This is not just about remembering events but also about how we represent them. Postmodernism sees time as a question of how we tell stories about history, not just about what happened. Cavallaro critiques traditional views of history, which often present it as a linear and progressive path toward reason and enlightenment. Postmodernism challenges this idea, pointing out that history does not always progress smoothly. Periods of great reason can be followed by chaos or irrationality, breaking the idea of continuous progress. Postmodernism highlights how history and time are fragmented, showing that they are more about representation than an unbroken chain of events. This perspective on time and history raises important questions. It asks who gets to decide how time is understood and for what purposes. The study of time is not just theoretical, it has real political and cultural effects. It shapes how we think about ourselves, our history, and our future. Linda Hechion further explores how time connects to history and cultural narratives. She shows that the way we understand time influences how we see our place in the world. Studying time is not just about abstract theories, it is about practical and cultures that affect our identities and societies. This makes time a crucial concept in both philosophy and cultural studies as it shapes how we understand the world around us. Michel Foucault's view of history, guided by his method called genealogy, does not aim to trace our identity back to its origins or return to some ideal past. Instead, genealogy focuses on how identities break apart, emphasizing the gaps and disruptions in history that shape who we are. Rather than searching for clear cause and effects, this approach sees history as made up of random and neat. Hayden White shares a similar perspective, seeing history as fragmented and unpredictable rather than smooth and idealized. In philosophy, two key views of time help us understand these views. The static view, represented by Parmenides, sees the world as unchanging, where time does not flow. On the other hand, the dynamic view, championed by Heraclitus, sees time as constantly moving, like his famous idea that you can never step into the same river twice. These contrasting views lay the foundation for how cultural studies explores time. Cultural studies approaches time differently than philosophy. Instead of asking what time is, it looks at how humans experience use time in their daily lives. It asks how societies understand the past, present, and future, and how these perceptions shape the way we live. Cultural studies also looks at the political side of time, how governments, organizations, and other groups use our ideas of time to influence us and control our actions. This use of time shapes how we see ourselves, other people, and the world. Postmodernism adds another layer to this discussion by questioning the idea of time as linear and progressive. Instead, it sees time as something represented through stories, language, and culture, a kind of text that we interpret. Postmodernism challenges us to think critically about how we represent the past, present, and future, and whether those representations are accurate or fair. Foucault's genealogical view of history is very different from the traditional idea of history as a purposeful journey toward progress known as teleology. While teleological history suggests that events unfold logically and with purpose, genealogy shows that history is full of accidents, mistakes, and overlapping influences. It does not focus on finding the beginning of things, but instead explores the messy and complicated connections between events. Foucault's approach encourages us to think critically about history and time, moving away from simplified narratives.